I did improv for a long time, and I always say anybody in any business should do improvisation because that will help kind of free your mind. And you feel silly at certain points, which you should. You get up there, you risk. But I always say that there's the other thing, which is amazing to me, is people are so scared to risk that I always want to put risk in a box and give it to some people because they do everything by the book, and you go, but you're not risking anything.
Right.
And yeah, you get disappointed and it sucks. And sometimes you cry, but then you go, okay, next job.
Next.
So
Yeah, that's awesome. So where do you think you had the biggest risk? The biggest risk that you took that you then were like, okay, that worked.
yeah, I would say one of my biggest risks was probably when I auditioned for The Simpsons,
Mhm.
and they said, well, actually, it's funny because when they asked me to do The Simpsons, or they asked me to do the Tracy Ullman show,
Oh.
and Fran Drescher was going to do the show, and she was guesting on it, and she didn't want to do this one sketch. And so my agents called and they said, well, you want to do the sketch with Tracy Ullman? And because Fran Drescher doesn't want to do it, I said, well, why would I want to do it? See, this is always good. And then they said, well, you'd be singing with Carole King and Clarence Clemens of the E Street Band and Tracy and Dan Castellaneta, and you'd sing Leader of the Pack. So that probably was one of those where I went, oh, okay. And that, went on the show, did that. Afterwards, the casting director said, would you like to audition for this series called The Simpsons? But at that time, it was just like, it was nothing. They were still little shorts. They said they're going to do a long version. I was like, yeah, all right. Okay, yeah, I could do that. And so I auditioned for it. And then now it's 32 years later.
32 years.
Yep. But I did probably the biggest risk I took was on the 10th year I quit. And then I came back on the 12th year. So because it was like money issues, but then we kind of hammered that all out. But there's sometimes where you go up for something. A friend of mine just went up for something, and now they're wanting to not pay actors very much money. And a lot of them are going, no, get someone else. And then they come back to you and go, okay, no, we'll do this. But it's that I think is the biggest risk when you're negotiating and thinking, okay, is this going to work? If I ask for a raise, is that going to be bad, or am I willing to move on if this doesn't work? You can't kind of half ask for a raise. You have to actually go for it and be willing to make some choices if that doesn't work.
So when you went to them and negotiated, we're going to get to your voice here in a moment with The Simpsons, because I think that's fascinating. But when you went to them after 10 years and said, no, I want to do this, and they're like, no, we don't need you that badly. What did you do over those 2 years?
We had to reinvent. So we did ringtones for phones, which had never been done before. But unfortunately, the phones that they had to go through certain kind of strata to get into each phone. But for years, we sold a bunch of those. And I also negotiated one of the first contracts with Stars Encore. So I was doing a lot of what we call the money voice, which is that voice that you hear that's smooth as silk. And there's a thing that can sell anything. So I did a lot of those money voice things. And then, but I negotiated one of the first contracts for at that time where they would have promos in the beginning of the week and promos in the end of the week. And they would just pay you a retainer. But after I did that, then a lot of people that were here were like going, we don't want to pay that. And so it was like, I set a bar, but people wouldn't go to that bar. So it was too bad, because after that, it's kind of like you're seeing everything happening with Screen Actor Guilds now, and negotiations with everything happening in the business, because streaming is streaming. And my husband, Hal, had been on the SAG board, and he at that time had said, well, what are we going to do about sampling? And they went, well, what can you do with 15 seconds? And then you hear Dan Castellaneta as Homer going, why I oughta, I mean, there's a lot they can do with sampling in 15 seconds.
Right.
So you realize that that SAG was just not ready at that time in AFTRA for the business to move digitally. So but I think they're getting a life-size picture of it now.